General guidelines for game preparation. I'm Tony. Welcome back to Streetball Strategies.
Handle the rock, court vision on blast. Fadeaways and threes, learn to adapt fast. Cut through the defense, glide through the air. Break ankles, catch breather, focus, repair.
Today we're talking about the general guidelines for preparing for competition. These are going to be general ideas of how, when you're preparing for game day, how you should go about preparing for that competition. This video is going to focus primarily on short-term preparation because the general ideal, long-term preparation for everything would just be be as well-rounded of a basketball player as you possibly can be, so that no matter what happens in that game, you're kind of ready for anything because you're that much of a well-rounded basketball player. That would be the long-term kind of goal when it comes to preparing for competition. So today we're just going to focus on sort of the night before and the day of the competition and how you should generally prepare for that game. We're going to approach this from the three normal modalities that I usually address when it comes to topics on this channel. So starting off with physicality, how do you physically prepare for a competition? The gist of being physically ready is that you need to be as fresh as you possibly can be. Kind of the reverse of saying that would be you want to have as little fatigue as possible. You don't want to be sore, you don't want to be tired, you don't want to be sick. You want your body to be as physically optimal, ready and fresh as possible. In the short term, that basically means the day before a game, a competition, you don't really want to fatigue and stress your body. So that means no intense practices, no intense training the day before a super important competition. Now, you do want to be physically active the day before, but the whole idea of the physicality the day before a game or competition is that basically the general over idea is you just want to remind your body of here's how you properly do X, Y, and Z movements. Tomorrow, when competition is on and it's very important how you perform, remind your body this is exactly the exact proper way to perform said activity. Whatever you're practicing, whatever you're drilling, training, whatever it may be, the overall idea is you're reminding your body, here's the exact proper way to go through this movement. So tomorrow, when I am pushing you, this is your psychology of you hypothetically talking to your body, which is tomorrow, when I'm pushing you, when we're going absolutely as hard as we can, and I'm being met by my opponents, my competition, they're trying to prevent me from doing everything that I'm doing today in the preparation for tomorrow. Here's what you need to remember. Here's the proper, correct way to go through this movement. Whatever that movement may be, you're reminding your body. When you're tired, when you have a defender in front of you, when he's pushing you, when he's getting in your way, when he's trying to impede you in any way, shape, or form, despite all of that, here's the exact proper way to do X, Y, and Z movements. That's the whole idea of the physicality, the preparation, practice, training the day before a competition and a game. You want your body to be locked into exact proper form through whatever movement is going to be performing the very next day. And then, of course, the night before games, competition, you want to get as much sleep, the best quality sleep you possibly can, so when you wake up that next day, you feel refreshed, ready to go, ready to compete. And then the day of that game leading up to that competition, the way to physically prepare your body is you want to be as warmed up as possible when the games and competition start. So again, you want to go through those drills to remind your body how to properly do the movements. That way, not only are you sort of psychologically getting your mind right, but you're also getting your blood circulating, right? You're getting your heart warmed up, your circulation warmed up, making sure your muscles are nice and warm, which is going to help to prevent injury, which is a big part of preparation on game day, which is all right, you want to perform as high intensity and your optimal performance as possible, but you also want to prevent injuries, because it's maybe if your performance is slightly declined, but you kind of like never get any real injuries, to me, that's a net positive. If like you're performing absolutely as high intensity and hard as you can, but in doing so, you get a significant kind of injury, to me, that's worse than playing a little bit less in terms of performance, but never getting injured. So injury prevention is key. The way you do that is warming up properly. There's no such thing as being too warmed up. A key part of this is stretching, but we need to be specific in that no static stretching before physical activity. That means stretching and holding a stretch for a certain amount of time. Static stretching is for after the activity. Before the activity, you want to dynamically stretch. That means whatever stretch you're doing for whatever body part it is, you want to stretch that body part within doing a movement, but not holding it. So for example, if you were trying to stretch your hamstrings, one thing you could do statically is just bend over, touch your toes, stay in that position and stretch your hamstrings. But that's what you would do after competition, after activity, after all the intensity and strain on your body is done. You don't do that before. Before you would do something like leg swings. You would swing your legs and have your legs be in motion, your hamstring in motion as you stretch your hamstring. You don't want it to be static before a game. You want movement, dynamic movement and stretching before the game to help get your muscles warm and stretched out before intense effort. Doing so will not only help to warm up your body, but will also help to prevent injury. The better warmed up you are, the better your body is going to perform in said competition. That means you want to have a little bit of a sweat going. You want to have your heart rate and your breath elevated slightly, right? So that when real intense movement happens, your body's not shocked into going from like 0 to 100, right? You kind of want to have your body already be at, and if we're talking about a scale of like 0 to 100 in terms of how your body is performing from a performance and effort standpoint, the kind of strain it has on it. If we're talking about 0 to 100, you don't want to start the game at 0, of course. You kind of want to start somewhere around 20-something, 30-something. That way, when the game starts, competition starts, and like you got to automatically put out high-intensity effort, now your body's already at 20-something, 30-something, and going from there to, 70, 80% of your max effort is not as strenuous. As opposed to if you're young and you kind of make the mistake of like, I'm young, my body's fresh, I don't have any injuries, I'm perfectly fine, I'm in great shape, I don't have to warm up. If you go from 0 to 100, if you're young, fresh, whatever, yes, chances are you'll probably be fine, but you're also increasing your chance to get injured. Maybe not that game that day, but over time you were definitely and drastically increasing the chance that you were going to get injured the less warmed up and stretched out your body is prior to high intensity competition. So warm up, be stretched out, have your body have gone through some kind of drills so it's used to, it gets ready to shoot the ball, move around, move laterally, jump up and down. Like you've already done those kind of drills prior to the game starting. That's how you helped your body warm up, by going through those kind of drills. If you do that, you warmed it properly, you're stretched out, you've gone through those mini drills to get ready. Once competition starts, physically, that's the best way to be prepared for a game. Secondly, from a mental, or more specifically a strategic standpoint, how do you be prepared strategically for a game or competition? This is kind of twofold, because you have to think, at least I like to think of it in terms of how am I strategically prepared, like myself, and then how is my strategy then going to be reflective of my competition? Meaning, okay, so in terms of myself and my game, what is my plan for that day? What are my goals? Like, the younger you are, the newer you are, usually the only overall general goal you have is like, play the best you can, and you're trying to test yourself. See where you are, what kind of progress you made, what's your ceiling. As a newer player, beginner player, that's definitely how you should approach game days and competition. But as your game grows and as you get better as a basketball player, you can then get more specific and have more of an agenda of what you're trying to achieve and test yourself on a given day. I'm more than a beginner now. I know that regardless of what happens, the circumstances that take place out here, I'm always going to play the very best basketball I can. That's kind of my default setting, is always play my top-notch basketball. And since that's second nature to me now, I've learned and taught myself to be that way. Now I can sort of start to think about, okay, this particular game day or maybe this particular game, I'm going to work on X, Y, and Z. Like maybe I'm going to work on my corner three-point shooting. I'm really going to focus on that today and see how I do. Can I effectively and consistently get myself open in the corner for a three? If I do that, then okay, how do I shoot under that condition? Or maybe I can't get myself open in the corner. If that's the case, then why is that? So the more advanced you get as a basketball player, the more you can sort of agendize what you're doing out here and have more specific as to like what your goals are, and then analyze them as you go through the day. That's the strategy that reflects you personally in your own sort of game. When we're talking about strategy concerning your opponents, the best thing you can do, like if you're an outdoor recreational player like this channel is meant for, then if you're playing competition, like me and my friends, Saturday was our game day, right? So we'd all meet at the park on Saturday, and that would be our big competition day. Because they were my friends, I knew their game. I understand what their game was and how they played, so then I could then prepare for that the day before, the morning of the game. I could think to myself, okay, this is who I'm going to be playing against. I know them. I know how they play. Here's how I can strategize against them. So from a strategic standpoint, you want to have your agenda for what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it and what your goals are. But when you're addressing your opponents, now it's like, okay, what are they trying to do? What's their agenda? What are their goals? How are they going to do that? How are they going to play on the court? And then how am I going to strategize against it? That's all good if we're talking about your friends and players that you know, players you already know their game, how they play. Now let's get into the psychology of how to deal with strangers, players that you don't know. So if you're playing AAU or high school and you're playing teams, or if you go to someone else's court, if you only play at your home court and you know all the players that play there, but if you're a visitor on someone else's court and you don't know them, you don't know their game at all, how can you strategically prepare for strangers, players, games that you don't know? Let's get into the psychology of that. When we address how to psychologically prepare for competitions and game days, when we're specifically talking about preparing for opponents that you don't know, so that you don't know their game and how they're going to play, the best way to psychologically prepare for that is to profile them, make assumptions about them and their game. It'd be great if you already had game tape of them that you could study and at least have an idea of how they play and what their strategy is. But if you don't, the only thing you can really do is guess. Now, some players make the argument that instead of guessing, like they don't want to guess about how a player is going to play, what their psychology is going to be, because they don't want to guess wrong. If they guess wrong, then they have to compensate on the fly in the middle of a game, and that might mess them up. They don't want to have to take that chance. I understand where they're coming from. I disagree with it, however, because the way I like to look at it is I would rather make a guess. I would rather assume. I would rather profile a player without knowing them or their game. I would rather do that, be wrong, and then have to adjust on the fly than to not do any of that and just look at them as like a blank slate and then have my strategy, my psychology of them, and thus my psychology of how I'm going to strategically play them sort of root from that. Meaning when I start to play them, I have no plan. I have no strategy. I have no plan. Like the way they play is then going to determine what my plan is. that's what, the opponents of making assumptions, that's the way they play. That's just the way they think. For me, I would rather attempt to guess how they're going to play, what their psychology is. And then if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And I'll adjust because that's just, that's what I'll do. Like, you kind of have to do that anyway. Like, you're going to have to guess, if you're defending the ball handler, you're kind of going to have to guess, like, what they're going to do next anyway. So if you're going to be guessing about that, if you're going to make educated guesses all throughout game after game anyway, then you might as well, instead of looking at your opponent as a blank slate and letting them dictate how you react to them, instead, I would rather go into the competition before it even starts, profiling them and thus prognosticating, like, okay, here's what my strategy is going to be. Even though I don't really know how they're going to play, I already have a strategy that I'm going to try to employ against them. If I'm wrong, and I'll adjust, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I have gone through the process of assuming and making assumptions, profiling my competition. I've gotten pretty good at it. I can make pretty good guesses of how they're going to play and what their psychology is, and thus how they're going to play. And because I've done that over and over again, I've gotten better and better over time, I can get to a point where, like, I can safely assume this is how they play. And thus, from the very beginning, the very start of a game competition, I have a strategy already in mind of here's what I'm going to try to do. Here's what I'm going to try to force them to do against their will, because I'm guessing, I'm assuming this is what their will is going to be. And if I know what their will is, meaning their game plan, I am then going to try to force them to do the opposite of that, make them uncomfortable, thus they're going to play worse. I get the whole idea of, like, don't judge a book by its cover, and you should never profile a person, you should never assume, make assumptions. And I agree with that, the general idea of that, in terms of, like, if you're making assumptions and profiling people for, like, nefarious reasons, then no, of course, never do that. But in terms of, like, competition, yes, please profile your competition. Make assumptions, guess at what they're trying to do, what their psychology is, and thus how they're going to play because of their psychology. Create a plan from that assumption. And then if you have to modify that plan, if you're like, oh, my assumption, my profile of that player and their psychology, it was wrong, then okay, then change it on the fly. I don't think that you're going to make some kind of irretrievable mistake at the beginning of a game because you assumed the wrong thing about the team's, the strategy and their psychology. I don't think you're going to be like, oh, I made the wrong guess and now the rest of the game is doomed because of it. No, you just change what your assumption was. You modify it and go, okay, I thought it was this. Now I got to change to that. And now the game goes on and I can then repair whatever minor damage was done because I made the wrong guess. Going a little bit deeper, if you can figure out your opponent's why, it's relatively easy and obvious to observe how your opponents are playing, what strategy they're trying to employ. But if psychologically you can understand why they're trying to do that, you've gone a level deeper than most other players out here on the court, because most other players don't care about that. They only care about how they're playing so that they can then, they only care about how they're playing so that they can then disrupt them. But if you can go a little bit deeper than that and understand why they're employing the strategy that they're trying to employ, you can be even more effective at disrupting their strategy. The better you know a player's why, the better you understand that, meaning like their psychological motivations, the easier it is to then disrupt how they play. For example, if I know a player is out here and his main driving force why he plays is because he's a show-off, meaning like he plays because he's looking for attention, and so he's kind of a show-off kind of player. The stuff he does, he's trying to show off and draw attention to himself. He wants attention. The reason for why he's playing the way he's playing is because he wants attention. If I know that, if I understand that, then I can disrupt that. One of the ways I can do that is, hopefully I have the skill and ability to embarrass him. right? Because if I embarrass him, he only wants, he's desiring positive attention, right? The more positive attention he gets, the better he feels about himself, the better he plays. But he doesn't want negative attention, right? Negative attention is like kryptonite to him. He wants attention. Attention is his main thing, but only if it's positive. If it's negative, it's going to negatively affect his game. So if I do something throughout a game to embarrass him, then hopefully and probably it's going to affect him in that he's probably going to become more of a timid player, at least for a small amount of time, until he finds a way to sort of work his confidence back during that game, maybe. But if I do something within a game to embarrass him, make him feel kind of bad and embarrassed about something that took place, some kind of play between him and I, if I do something to embarrass him, it's going to make him timid. The more timid he is, the less of a threat on the basketball court he then becomes. And that's just a small example of how you can psychologically affect someone out here. So if you can understand a player's why, their motivation as a player, the better you can then understand how to disrupt them. But also understand the reverse is true as well. You need to understand your why, your motivation, because probably it's going to be rare, right, for a player to do that to you, to try to use your psychology against you, because most players just don't do that. Most players are not concerned with the psychological aspect of the game, but occasionally you will come across a player who does try to play mind games with you, meaning they're going to try to test your psychology, test your motivation, test your devotion to how and why you play. So your psychology needs to be on point as well. Like, you know, you understand, you are very steadfast on, here's how I play, but I play that way because X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z is my motivation. It is why I'm out here. It's my psychology, and I am completely steadfast, strong, and accepting of it. It makes complete sense to me. I have all my psychological ducks in a row. No matter what anybody says or does to me out here, I always play that way with that agenda because my motivation is X, Y, and Z, and that's just it. It's just concrete. No matter what anyone says or does, that's how I play. Just as you're trying to shake other players' psychology and disrupt them, your psychology needs to be rock solid. But if it is rock solid, it better be good. It better be positive, meaning like if your game is, if you have like a shaky game, like your game's not that great yet and you're still in the learning process, and thus, like, you can't, confidence is earned. So you're trying to disrupt other people's confidence. But if your confidence isn't genuine, meaning you haven't really earned it and you're kind of just faking it because you haven't yet earned that confidence by building skill or ability yet that, then deserves that actual real kind of confidence yet, which is fine. Like if you're a new, younger player, you're in the process of building that confidence, building those skills, building that ability. That's fine, but you need to be pliable in that case, meaning like, okay, if someone does or says something, you kind of have to learn from it. It shouldn't make you, fall off your game and like your game goes to pieces because someone did something to you that embarrassed you or made you feel bad. If you're younger or newer, you need to learn from that stuff. But if you're older, if you're more established, now because you have that earned confidence, that confidence should not be shaken. As long as it's genuinely earned because you have actual skills and abilities that you've put in the work and the experience to attain, then that psychology should never be disrupted. But if you're younger or newer and you're still learning, that's okay. It's not that if someone does something that embarrasses you or makes you feel bad out here, it's not like, oh, you should be destroyed and your game should fall apart. It's just like, instead, learn from it and get better. But still play hard and still play as smartly as you can. Those are general guidelines of how to be prepared for competition. From a general standpoint, doing these things, in my opinion, is the best way to be prepared for a certain game or competition where you're trying to perform and test yourself the most. So I want to thank you guys for watching. If you like this video, if you found it helpful at all, if you think it's going to help you prepare a little bit better for your given game days, then please subscribe into the channel. And let us know down in the comments, how do you prepare for games and competition? What's your strategy for playing your best basketball in terms of how you prepare for specific games? But before you comment, make sure you hit that thanks button down below, because not only does hitting that thanks button highlight every comment you make, making it stand out from any other comment, but hitting that thanks button also directly supports the channel. So for anyone that does hit that thanks button, know I genuinely appreciate it. As always, like, share, comment, like I said, make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified whenever any video goes live on this channel. And until then, see you guys next week.
Strategic ballet, outthink, outplay. Park legends rise, star beams relay. Shadow drills at dusk, reflect and grow. Mind rehearsal, trace every step, every throw. No room for doubt, only discipline molds. Tough love whispers, endurance holds.